The rain poured relentlessly from the dark, storm-filled sky. It came down in sheets, drenching everything it touched, turning the earth beneath into a sludgy mess of mud and water. The air was thick with the scent of wet soil and iron, a harsh metallic smell that clung to the skin and filled the lungs. Through the downpour, the sound of muffled cries echoed, barely audible above the storm's fury. A tiny, desperate whimper came from beneath a pile of rusted chains and broken metal, barely visible in the gloom of the alleyway. The small puppy, barely a few weeks old, was trapped, its small body tangled in the heavy chains that weighed it down like an anchor, the links digging cruelly into its fragile form. Its fur was matted, soaked through with the relentless rain, its large brown eyes wide with fear and pain. The puppy whined, pulling weakly against the chains, but the metal held it tight, pinning it down against the wet ground. Its small, fragile body shuddered with each attempt to break free, but the chains didn't give. Before we begin, let me know where you are watching from. Leave your country name in the comments below. And if you love stories about courage, loyalty, and community, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. Ethan Cole, 35 years old, male, rugged face, wearing camouflage uniform, appeared in the alleyway, his boots splashing through the mud as he moved quickly through the rain. His sharp eyes scanned the scene before him, and the moment they landed on the trapped puppy, his heart clenched. The soldier rushed forward, his hand reaching instinctively for his knife. His face was hard, focused, but there was something in his eyes, a mixture of empathy and something deeper, that softened the edges of his stern expression. Without hesitation, he fell to his knees beside the puppy, ignoring the cold, the rain, and the mud. His hands worked quickly, expertly, cutting through the rusted chains with the precision of a man used to cutting through obstacles, whether they were metal or human. His movements were sharp, but there was a tenderness to them, a gentle care, as if the puppy's pain was his own. He cut through the last of the chains and immediately scooped the trembling puppy into his arms, holding it close to his chest to offer warmth and comfort against the cold. The puppy's small body shuddered against his chest, but it was no longer trapped. It was free. For a moment, Ethan simply held the puppy, his breaths heavy, his mind racing with the weight of the moment. But then something shifted within him, an overwhelming wave of exhaustion, of emotion. He had saved the puppy, but he could still hear the faint echoes of the cries that haunted him. The sound of people, the sound of pain, the sound of everything he had lost, the memories of the battlefield, of the things he had seen, the horrors he had endured. All of it rushed back to him in that moment. With the puppy still in his arms, he collapsed to the ground, the weight of his emotions breaking through the shield he had built for so long. Tears mixed with the rain as he held the puppy, his body shaking not from the cold, but from something deeper, something that no soldier could outrun. The puppy licked his hand, its small tongue warm and comforting against his skin. It wasn't just an animal he had saved, it was a symbol of something more, of loyalty, of innocence, of the hope that he had lost somewhere along the way. The rain continued to fall, but Ethan didn't care anymore. He sat there, holding the puppy, as the storm raged around him, offering a small piece of solace in a world that often felt too heavy to carry. The storm raged on, but inside Ethan Cole's chest, something had changed. The tears he had shed, though brief, felt like a release, like the dam that had held back all his emotions for so long had finally cracked. He didn't know how long he had been sitting in the rain, holding the tiny puppy, but the world around him felt different now. The cold rain no longer felt as sharp, the heavy weight of his military past, the trauma, the battles, didn't feel as suffocating as it had moments before. Max, the tiny puppy he cradled in his arms, whimpered softly, nuzzling against Ethan's chest. Its fur, drenched and matted, was a contrast to its warmth, and as the soldier rubbed its small back, he felt an unexpected sense of calm spread through him. His hand trembled slightly as he wiped his face, realizing that the rain had masked not just the sound of his own sobs, but also the battle scars he'd been carrying for years. He had fought in wars, endured pain, and witnessed loss, but never had he felt so utterly helpless as in the moment he found this small, vulnerable creature trapped and suffering. "I won't leave you," he whispered, his voice hoarse but steady now. "You're safe, Max. You're safe." The words felt foreign on his tongue, but they were true. His chest ached with a heaviness he had never acknowledged before, and as the puppy gave a soft whine, Ethan could almost feel the burden of a promise being made. For all the hardships Ethan had faced, for all the people he had lost, he wasn't about to lose this little soul. His instincts as a soldier kicked in again, quickly, sharply. He rose to his feet with Max still cradled in his arms, looking around for shelter. There was a rusted shed nearby, its wooden frame weathered and decayed, but it would be enough. He moved toward it, his boots sinking into the mud, the weight of the moment slowly becoming clearer in his mind. Inside the shed, he set the puppy down gently on a pile of hay, glancing around to make sure the place was safe. The walls were lined with old tools, unused and forgotten, but the small space provided some respite from the storm. The air smelled of damp wood and rust, but it was dry, and that was enough. Max let out a soft, muffled bark curling up on the hay, its small body still trembling from the cold. Ethan crouched down next to it, pulling off his jacket and wrapping it around the puppy, his heart swelling with a strange protectiveness. "Stay warm, little one," he murmured, rubbing its tiny head. His fingers brushed against its soft, wet fur, and he couldn't help but think how much it reminded him of the innocence lost in his own life, of the people he had failed to protect, of the things he could never get back. Suddenly, the harsh reality of his situation hit him again. His mission, his purpose, was far from over. But there, in that small, damp shed, it was just him and the puppy. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like maybe, just maybe, he had something worth fighting for again. He sat beside Max, his fingers absently running through the puppy's fur as he stared out into the rain. The storm seemed to mirror his internal struggle, an endless downpour pouring over the wreckage of his life, washing away everything he thought he understood. But this puppy, this tiny, innocent creature, reminded him that survival wasn't about just holding on. It was about finding a reason to keep moving, to keep going, even when it felt like the world was against you. A sharp bark broke through his thoughts, and Ethan turned to see Max standing now, his ears perked and his body tense. The puppy's instincts were sharp, and Ethan knew immediately that the danger wasn't over. He stood up quickly, his military training taking over, reaching for his weapon, his eyes scanning the darkened shed. The sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, reached his ears. He froze, listening. The storm was so loud, but the footsteps were unmistakable. Someone was out there. He crouched down, pulling Max behind him, out of sight, his hand on the hilt of his knife. His mind raced. Who would be out here in the middle of this downpour? Were there more people from his past? Or worse, were they after him? The tension in the air thickened as the footsteps grew closer, their rhythm steady and deliberate, but strangely familiar. Ethan's hand tightened around his knife, his breath shallow, his senses sharpened. "Stay quiet," he whispered to Max, who was shaking, but obediently huddled close. The puppy could sense the change in Ethan's demeanor, and its quiet whimper was the only sound that broke the silence. The door creaked open slightly, and then a voice, deep but filled with recognition, called out, "Ethan, is that you?" Ethan froze, his hand still on the knife. The rain continued to fall, the storm still raging outside, but in that moment everything else seemed to fall away. The voice was unmistakable. It was a voice he hadn't heard in years, a voice from his past. "Ethan, it's me, Noah." The name hit Ethan Cole like a punch to the gut. Noah. The rain was still pounding against the old shed, the storm's fury relentless, but all Ethan could hear was that voice, so familiar yet so distant. It was as if a part of him had been awakened, a chapter of his life that he had long since buried, a name he hadn't spoken aloud in years. He tightened his grip on the knife instinctively, but then he froze, heart hammering in his chest. "Noah?" Ethan muttered, barely above a whisper. The sound of his own voice felt strange to him. How could Noah be here? And why now, after all this time? A figure stepped into the doorway of the shed, framed by the heavy rain and the flickering dim light of the storm. Noah Ramirez, 36 years old, tall with dark hair and a face that was etched with time and struggle, stood in the entrance. His clothes were soaked through, his jacket torn, his posture weary. There was a weariness in his eyes, too, something Ethan hadn't seen in a long time. Noah didn't move at first, and neither did Ethan. It was as if the world had stopped for a moment, frozen in the weight of this unexpected reunion. "You've got to be kidding me," Ethan finally spoke, his voice rough from disbelief. He hadn't seen Noah in years, not since the war. The man who had once been his closest friend, his brother in arms, now stood before him like a ghost from the past. The air in the shed was thick with the sound of the storm, but for a moment everything else faded away. It felt like no time had passed at all, yet so much had. Ethan still couldn't believe it. "You're alive," Ethan said, almost in disbelief, his mind racing. The last time he had heard of Noah, he had been declared MIA during a mission gone wrong in hostile territory. For Ethan, the loss of his friend had been one of the hardest blows of the war. He had carried that weight with him, that knowledge that he hadn't been able to save Noah. "Barely," Noah replied, his voice hoarse, but there was a wry smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He stepped inside the shed, his movements slow but deliberate, as if the storm had worn him down to his last nerve. "What the hell happened to you?" Ethan asked, his voice sharp, tinged with concern, though he tried to hide it. The years had changed Noah. His face was harder, more lined, his eyes darker, haunted by something Ethan couldn't quite place. "I could ask you the same thing," Noah replied, a strange laugh escaping his lips. "But I'm guessing you didn't get lost in the rain, huh?" Ethan looked down at the puppy in his arms. Max, 6 weeks old, with wet, brown fur and a small, fragile body, shivered slightly in his hold, looking up at Ethan with wide, trusting eyes. He was a living reminder of the bond between them, of the promise Ethan had made. Ethan's eyes softened for a moment before he turned his gaze back to Noah. "Max," Ethan whispered, almost protectively, as if the dog was his lifeline. "Found him abandoned, trapped in rusted chains." Noah's gaze shifted to the puppy, his expression softening for a brief moment. The man's hardened exterior softened just a touch as he saw the dog. "Jesus, that's a hell of a find." Ethan nodded, still processing the shock of seeing Noah again. "What the hell are you doing here, Noah? You disappeared. Everyone thought you were dead." Noah hesitated, running a hand through his drenched hair as he let out a heavy sigh. He wasn't the same man Ethan remembered. There was no bravado, no cocky grin, just exhaustion, the kind that ran deep, deeper than the storm outside. "I should have been," Noah finally said, his voice quieter now, as if he was ashamed of something. "I was left behind. That mission." He trailed off, his eyes flicking to the floor, unwilling to finish the sentence. Ethan stepped forward, his concern growing. He had always known Noah to be a fighter. If Noah was here, there was something bigger at play. "You've been on your own all this time?" Ethan asked, the question feeling heavy. Noah didn't need to answer. Ethan could see the truth in his eyes. He had been alone, likely fighting for survival the entire time. Noah shrugged, looking up at Ethan with an empty, almost resigned look. "I did what I had to do to survive. But it's harder without the team." He paused, glancing at Max again, who was now snuggled closer to Ethan, finding comfort in the soldier's warmth. It's been hell, man. But I'm not giving up. Not now. Ethan stood there for a moment, letting the weight of those words sink in. His hand instinctively reached for Max, who nuzzled against his arm, finding solace in the small moments of peace. In the distance, the rain continued to pour, the thunder rumbling low across the sky. "You're not alone anymore, Noah," Ethan finally said, his voice steady. "I'm here, and this time we stick together." There was a long pause before Noah nodded, the smallest hint of gratitude flickering in his eyes. His face softened, but only for a moment. The old Noah was still there, deep down, but Ethan could see the scars that remained from everything they had lost, everything they had been through. "We'll figure it out," Noah said quietly, stepping closer to Ethan and the puppy. Together. As the storm raged outside, Ethan knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in a long time, with Noah standing beside him, he believed that maybe, just maybe, he could face whatever came next. The storm outside was relentless, the rain hammering against the shed's roof, the wind howling through the cracks in the walls. Inside, Ethan Cole, 35 years old, male, rugged face, wearing camouflage uniform, sat next to Noah Ramirez, 36 years old, tall, dark hair, wearing soaked, tattered clothes, the weariness in his eyes betraying the hardships he'd endured. Max, the puppy, lay nestled in Ethan's arms, his small body shivering but comforted by the warmth of his protector. The shed felt small now, the walls pressing in on them. Ethan kept glancing at Noah, the old friend who had returned from the dead, but the reunion was heavy. There was no joy, only an unspoken understanding between them. Something had changed, something had been lost in the time apart. "You're really here," Ethan said softly, his voice still holding a trace of disbelief. I thought you were gone." Noah's jaw tightened, and he exhaled a long breath, trying to gather his thoughts. "I thought I was too," he said quietly. "When the mission went south, when I was left behind, I didn't know if I'd make it out. But I did, barely." He leaned back against the wall of the shed, rubbing his face with his hands. The exhaustion was evident on his face, the kind that came from not just physical weariness, but from the weight of everything he had experienced. "I did things I'm not proud of, to survive. But here I am." Ethan said nothing for a moment. He had known Noah for years, but this version of him was different, hardened, more distant. Yet Ethan couldn't help but understand. War had a way of changing people, of breaking them down and rebuilding them into something unrecognizable. He had seen it happen too many times, and he knew Noah would never be the same after everything he had been through. "Max saved me today," Ethan said, glancing down at the tiny puppy, who had curled up in his lap, now breathing steadily as the warmth of the shed began to calm his trembling. "I don't think I would have kept going if I hadn't found him. He's like a reminder of something pure." Noah shifted his weight and looked at the puppy. His eyes softened, if only for a brief moment, as he looked at the fragile creature. "Sometimes the smallest things can remind you why you keep going," he said, his voice a bit more raw than usual. "You know, after the war, after everything, I thought there was nothing left to care about. But maybe you're right. Maybe that's what we need to keep going." Ethan nodded slowly, watching the puppy's small form rise and fall with each breath. The rain outside continued to beat down, but in that small corner of the world, there was a sense of quiet. "So, what now?" Ethan asked, glancing up at Noah. "You've been gone for so long, and I have no idea what happened out there, but I'm not going to leave you out here alone." Noah paused, running a hand through his damp hair. His expression hardened again, like a wall had gone up inside him. "I've been living on the edge for too long. But I'm not stupid, Ethan. I'm not here for anything good. I'm here because I need your help. There's something out there, something big, and I can't do it alone." Ethan didn't flinch. He had already made his choice. He had chosen to stay with Noah despite everything. "What is it, Noah? What's out there?" The question hung in the air, thick and unresolved. Noah didn't answer immediately, his gaze drifting out the small crack in the shed's door. He seemed lost in thought, the weight of what he was about to say almost too much to bear. "Ethan, there's a whole network of people, survivors like us. Some of them are trying to rebuild, to make a new life. But some—" He paused, his fists clenching, his anger flaring. "Some are taking advantage of the chaos. They're hunting people like Max, like you, people who can't fight back." The room grew tense, the realization hitting Ethan like a punch to the gut. Noah wasn't just here to reconnect. He had come back because of something much darker, something far more dangerous. "You want me to help you take them down, don't you?" Ethan asked quietly, his voice steady. "Yes," Noah said simply, his eyes locking with Ethan's. "We take them down before they do even more damage, before they come after everyone we care about." Ethan stood up, holding the puppy carefully in his arms, his gaze never leaving Noah. "All right, let's finish this. Together." For the first time since Noah had appeared, something shifted between them. It wasn't just the bond of soldiers, it was something deeper. Something born from shared trauma, from understanding, from a belief that they could make a difference if they fought together. Noah stood up slowly, a slight, grim smile crossing his lips. "Thanks, man. I knew you'd be in." But Ethan didn't smile back. He was already thinking of what came next. The road ahead would be difficult and dangerous, but they had each other. And that was a start. Max gave a small yawn, curling up tighter in Ethan's arms, the little puppy unaware of the danger that loomed, unaware that its tiny presence had become a turning point in the soldier's life. "You're not alone anymore, Noah," Ethan said, his voice firm, his grip on the puppy tightening. "And neither am I." The heavy rain continued to batter the shed, its steady rhythm a constant reminder of the storm that raged outside. Inside, Ethan and Noah, their bond reawakened by the harsh realities of survival, sat in the dim light, facing the uncertain road ahead. The puppy, Max, curled comfortably in Ethan's lap, its small body warming him against the biting cold of the storm. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Noah stared into the fire they had built in the corner, his face shadowed by the flickering light, his mind lost in thought. The weight of what he was about to ask of Ethan, the danger they would face, hung between them, unspoken but understood. Ethan felt it too. He could see it in the way Noah held himself now. It wasn't just about protecting a puppy or fighting the storm anymore. It was about something deeper, something more personal, and that realization made the air between them thick with the sense of a new mission. "Ethan." Noah finally broke the silence, his voice softer now, tinged with the exhaustion of their shared history. "I need you to know this isn't just about survival. It's about something bigger. People like Max, people who have nothing but the hope that someone will save them, are being hunted. They're targeting anyone they can use." Ethan set Max down on the hay beside him, the puppy immediately curling up, his eyes drooping with fatigue. It was almost as if the little creature could feel the shift in the atmosphere. Ethan turned his attention to Noah, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You didn't come all the way here just to warn me, did you?" Noah shook his head, a tired smile flickering briefly across his face. "No, I came because I need help. We need to stop them." "They're getting stronger, Ethan. They're not just raiders or survivors. They're organized. They've got numbers. They've got firepower. And if we don't do something, this whole place, everything we've fought for, will fall apart." The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of their implications. Ethan knew this was serious. He had seen what men like that were capable of. He'd fought alongside men who'd done things that still haunted him. The thought of facing people like that again made his chest tighten. But then, looking at Noah, Ethan realized something. This wasn't the same person he had once known. Noah was a man shaped by the cruelty of the world, but he hadn't given up. And neither had Ethan, not entirely. "I'll help," Ethan said after a long pause, his voice resolute. "We'll stop them." A flicker of relief passed over Noah's face, but he remained quiet for a moment longer, his eyes distant. Ethan could see that Noah was still carrying something heavy, something that wasn't just about the mission, but about his own journey. The man he had been had changed, and Ethan knew it, felt it. "We can't do this alone," Noah continued, his voice steady but edged with the weight of experience. "I've been out there alone for too long. You and me, we might make it out of this alive, but we need allies. Good people." The mention of good people brought a pause to Ethan's thoughts. There was a part of him, a small part, that wondered if there was any real chance of finding any. The world had changed, and people, real people, were few and far between. But the loyalty he had to Noah, the bond they shared, was something that couldn't be ignored. "Where do we start?" Ethan asked, pulling his attention back to Noah. He wasn't a man to waste time on plans that wouldn't work. But this felt different. There was a fire in Noah's eyes that Ethan hadn't seen in a long time. "We start by taking down the group that's been running the show around here," Noah said, his eyes hardening with resolve. "We'll hit them where it hurts, take down their supply chain, make sure they can't keep hunting people." Ethan nodded, the plan forming in his mind. He was no stranger to missions, no stranger to the cold reality of a fight. But this was different. Noah had been through hell, and now he was dragging Ethan into it again. But somehow Ethan didn't mind. Not when it meant standing beside someone who had shared the same pain, the same survival instinct. As the hours passed, the rain began to ease, though the storm was far from over. The shed was quiet now, except for the soft sound of Max's breathing. Noah stood up, grabbing his gear, preparing for what was to come. Ethan stood with him, adjusting his jacket and reaching for his weapon. "Noah," Ethan said before he left the shed, his voice low but firm. "No matter what happens, we stick together. You don't go off on your own again." Noah paused, looking back over his shoulder with a faint, tired smile. "I wasn't planning on it." The shed's fragile walls groaned as another gust of wind pushed against them. The storm outside hadn't let up, but inside there was a fire, not just the crackling flame they had built in the corner, but a fire in their hearts reignited by purpose. Ethan Cole, 35 years old, rugged face, wearing camouflage uniform, stood with his hands braced against the wall, his sharp eyes fixed on the world outside through a narrow crack. Beside him, Noah Ramirez, 36 years old, tall, dark hair, clothes weathered by hardship, adjusted the strap on his rifle, his jaw tight with thought. Between them, curled on the hay, was Max, the tiny puppy, fast asleep at last, its chest rising and falling in a rhythm that brought a fragile kind of peace to the room. Ethan broke the silence first. "So tell me, Noah, what exactly are we up against? You said they're organized. Who are they?" Noah exhaled, long and heavy. "They call themselves the Black Vultures, scavengers, mercenaries, traffickers, men who profit off misery. They pick the weak apart, families, strays, even kids. No rules, no mercy. I've seen them chain people the same way I found that pup." Ethan's knuckles whitened against the wooden beam he was leaning on. His mind flashed back to the chains around Max, to the look of helplessness in the animal's eyes. His chest tightened. "And you've been fighting them alone?" "For too long," Noah admitted. "Every time I thought I'd slowed them down, more showed up. They've got supply caches hidden across the woods, guarded day and night. They take what they want and burn what they leave behind." The soldier's instincts kicked in. "Caches," Ethan muttered, pacing. "If we cut those off, they'll starve, they'll scatter, but it won't be easy." Noah cracked a tired smile. "Since when did you care about easy?" Ethan glanced back at the sleeping puppy. His voice hardened. "Since the day I realized the innocent pay the price for our mistakes. We're not just fighting for survival this time, Noah. We're fighting so things like this don't happen again." For the first time in years, Noah saw the Ethan he remembered, the soldier who had once carried an entire unit on his back, who never let anyone fall behind. That same fire burned in his eyes now, and it gave Noah a strange comfort. But the storm had its own plans. A crack of lightning illuminated the shed, followed by the roll of thunder, and then, faint beneath the roar of the storm, came something else. The crunch of footsteps, slow, deliberate, approaching. Both men froze. Ethan motioned to Noah with 2 fingers, signaled to stay low, and reached for his rifle. Noah mirrored him, his body instinctively sliding into combat readiness. Max, even in his drowsy state, stirred, his ears twitching. A low growl rumbled in the tiny pup's throat, soft but certain. Ethan crouched by the door, his breath steady despite the pounding of his heart. The steps grew closer, sloshing through the mud. Whoever it was, they weren't stumbling. They were moving with purpose. Noah whispered, just loud enough for Ethan to hear, "They found us!" The soldier pressed his back against the wall, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. His jaw tightened. "Then they're about to learn they made a mistake." The footsteps stopped, right outside. And then 3 sharp knocks on the shed's wooden door. The storm went silent in their ears, all sound drowned out by the tension hanging in the air. Ethan's pulse quickened, his body braced. He wasn't sure if it was an enemy, a survivor, or something else. But he knew one thing. This night was far from over. The rain had softened, though the wind still howled, pressing against the shed like an unseen force trying to tear it apart. Ethan Cole, 35 years old, rugged face, wearing camouflage uniform, crouched in the corner, rifle ready, his eyes narrowing on the door. Noah Ramirez, 36 years old, tall, dark hair, clothes weathered by hardship, stood motionless by the window, his hand resting on the barrel of his own weapon, waiting for the next move. The 3 knocks on the door hung in the air, the sound heavy in the silence that had fallen over the shed. Max, the puppy, still nestled in the hay, let out a soft whine, sensing the tension in the room. But Ethan's focus was on the door, on the sound of the storm, on the faint echo of footsteps that had now retreated into the night. "You expecting company?" Ethan whispered, his voice low but sharp. Noah didn't reply immediately, his eyes fixed on the door. His gaze was distant, almost unreadable. "No," he said quietly, "and I don't trust it." Another crack of thunder. This time the storm seemed to rage with a ferocity that matched the moment. The pounding rain drowned out all other sounds as the door creaked again, like it was being tested, as if someone on the other side was trying to gauge whether or not they could make it inside. Ethan's breath came in short, controlled bursts, his finger still resting on the trigger of his rifle. He didn't know who was out there, but he wasn't going to wait to find out. "On 3, he murmured to Noah. "We open it fast." Noah nodded, his hand tightening around his weapon. "Just don't fire unless you have to. We need answers." A beat of silence passed between them. "1," Ethan began, his voice low, barely audible over the rain. "2," Noah responded, his eyes flicking over to Ethan. "3." Without hesitation, Ethan flung open the door, his rifle raised and ready to fire. But what he saw stopped him dead in his tracks. Standing in the doorway, drenched to the bone and looking utterly exhausted, was a familiar face. Ethan. Noah. It was a voice neither of them had expected to hear again. A woman, weathered and weary, stepped forward into the dim light of the shed. Ava, 30 years old, long brown hair, dark eyes that still held a glint of determination despite the fatigue etched across her face. Her clothes were soaked through, her boots caked in mud, but there was no mistaking her. "Ava," Noah said, his voice rising in surprise. He took a step forward as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "What the hell are you doing here?" I didn't have much of a choice, she said, her voice low and grim. I was looking for you two, but I didn't think I'd be walking into a damn war zone. Ethan lowered his rifle slightly, but didn't relax his stance. There were too many questions, too many unknowns. Ava had been with their group in the early days, but she disappeared months ago, leaving no trace, no sign. They had assumed the worst. Now here she was, standing in front of them, soaked and exhausted. "Where's the rest of your group?" Ethan asked, his tone sharper than he intended. "They're gone," she said quietly, her eyes flickering to the floor. "Ambushed. We were caught off guard. I barely made it out alive." Noah stepped forward, his expression hardening. "By who? The Black Vultures?" Ava nodded, her lips tightening as she looked between the two men. "Yeah, they've gotten stronger, Noah. We don't stand a chance against them unless we fight back, and we need all the help we can get." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "So why come to us now? Why didn't you come sooner?" Ava's gaze dropped to the puppy in Ethan's arms, its small form curled up and shivering, then back to Ethan and Noah. "Because I had to survive first," she said, her voice breaking with the weight of her words. "I couldn't come back empty-handed. Not after losing everyone." Ethan studied her for a moment, his mind racing. There was pain in her eyes, a grief that had been buried for too long. He didn't trust her entirely, not yet. But he couldn't ignore the truth in her words. The Black Vultures had grown stronger, and they needed more than just 2 soldiers and a puppy to take them down. "I'm not asking for sympathy," Ava said, her voice cold now. "I'm asking for help. We all need to stick together if we're going to survive." Noah glanced at Ethan, his jaw set. They had come this far, and the fight was far from over. The enemy was out there, stronger and more organized than they had imagined, and now Ava was here, a survivor and a potential ally in a world that had become increasingly unforgiving. "We'll help you," Ethan said after a long pause, his voice steady. "But we do this on our terms." Ava nodded, her face unreadable, but the faintest trace of relief washed over her. She had expected resistance, but she had known it was her only chance. The storm outside continued to rage, but for the first time in a long while, the air inside the shed felt a little less suffocating. "Thank you," she said quietly, her eyes meeting Ethan's. "You don't know what this means." "Don't thank me yet," Ethan replied, his eyes hardening with determination. "We still have a lot of work to do." The rain continued to pour, but inside, for the first time, the trio felt like they had a shot, no matter how slim, at turning the tide. They would face whatever came next together, and this time they wouldn't be alone. The storm outside continued to howl, but inside the shed the atmosphere had shifted. Ethan Cole, 35 years old, rugged face, wearing camouflage uniform, now stood beside Noah Ramirez, 36 years old, tall, dark hair, wearing soaked, tattered clothes, and Ava, 30 years old, long brown hair, dark eyes, soaked to the bone, but still standing with determination. Max, the tiny puppy, lay nestled in Ethan's lap, calm and secure despite the chaos of the world around them. The fire crackled softly in the corner, providing the only light in the small, damp space. The storm outside raged on, but inside there was an unspoken resolve that hung in the air. It was clear they were no longer just survivors trying to stay alive. They were a team, and they had a mission. Ava broke the silence first. "I came here because I didn't know where else to go. I'm not proud of running, but after everything that happened, I didn't have a choice. I thought I could outrun them." Ethan looked at her, his eyes sharp, but not unkind. "You made it this far. That's more than most can say." Noah's expression softened slightly. "We don't get to pick when we're survivors, Ava. We just keep moving, one step at a time." She nodded, the weight of her past in her eyes. She had seen the horrors of the world outside and survived them. But Ethan could tell there was something deeper, something unspoken that haunted her. "We have to stop them," Ethan said, his voice resolute. The black vultures, they're not just a threat to us, they're a threat to everyone. They've taken enough from people who don't have a choice in this fight. Ava's eyes met Ethan's, and she gave a small, shaky nod. That's why I'm here. I need your help. We need to hit them before they have the chance to hurt anyone else. Noah stood up and grabbed his pack, moving toward the door. We don't have time to waste. We hit their main supply stash tonight. Ethan stood as well, placing Max gently in the hay beside him. Let's get moving then. We hit them hard. No hesitation. We cut off their lifeline. Ava stepped forward, grabbing her gear. Where's the plan? She asked, looking from Ethan to Noah. First, we need to track their movements. They're too well organized to just walk in blind, Noah replied. We'll need recon. I'll head to the east side. Ethan, you take the west. Ava, you'll stay with Max and monitor the perimeter. We can't afford to be caught off guard. Ethan nodded, his eyes scanning the room as he grabbed his pack. The plan was simple, but it had to be. They couldn't afford any mistakes. They moved quickly, silently, as the wind howled and rain continued to pour. Ava stayed close to the fire for warmth, clutching the puppy against her chest. She could feel the weight of everything they were about to do pressing on her. But the idea of stopping the black vultures was enough to keep her steady. The world outside was a mess of shadows and uncertainty. But tonight, they had a chance, a real chance to make a difference. Ethan and Noah slipped out of the shed, moving in opposite directions through the heavy rain. Ava watched them disappear into the storm, her heart pounding. They were doing this for the people who couldn't fight, for the ones who didn't stand a chance. And as the last of their figures disappeared into the storm, she turned to the puppy in her arms, whispering softly, "We're doing this for you too, Max. No more running." The hours that followed were tense, filled with careful movements through the rain-soaked wilderness. Ethan moved with a purpose, his mind sharp, his instincts honed by years of training. The black vultures were out there, just beyond the reach of his rifle's sight. But he would find them. They would be stopped. Meanwhile, Noah crept silently through the woods, his eyes scanning for any signs of movement. The black vultures were closer than anyone realized. Every step was calculated. The danger of being caught in their sights was ever present. But each of them had a role to play, and together they would make sure it counted. The rain had become a steady drizzle, the storm slowly losing its rage as the night grew deeper. The ground beneath Ethan Cole's boots was still slick with mud, but his focus was unshakable. His rifle was slung across his back, and his eyes were constantly moving, scanning the forest around him for any sign of movement. He knew the black vultures were close. Noah had gone silent, disappearing into the night on his own mission, and Ava was back at the shed, keeping Max safe. Ethan had told her to stay behind, knowing that the coming fight would be brutal, and she had been reluctant, but understood. They couldn't afford to put her or the puppy in harm's way. Ethan pressed forward, slipping through the dense underbrush, moving as silently as he could. Every muscle in his body was tense, every sense on high alert. The black vultures didn't make mistakes, and neither would he. The abandoned cabin they had been tracking for hours was just ahead. The faint glow of a campfire flickered in the distance, its warmth barely visible through the trees. Ethan moved closer, crouching low, his breath slow and controlled. He was within striking distance. Suddenly the crackle of leaves underfoot. A figure stepped out of the shadows, and before Ethan could react, a sharp voice cut through the air. "You're not getting away this time, soldier!" It was a voice Ethan recognized. A man who had once been his superior, now turned against everything they stood for. James Thorne, the leader of the Black Vultures. The man responsible for the chaos that had swept across the land. The one who had torn apart families, destroyed everything Ethan had fought for. Thorne stood there, his face partially hidden under the shadow of his hood. He was tall, rugged, dressed in a black tactical outfit and armed to the teeth. The campfire behind him cast an eerie light on his face, illuminating the cold, calculating expression in his eyes. "You always were a stubborn one, Ethan," Thorn continued, his voice dripping with malice. "You think you can stop me? You and your little band of misfits? You're out of your depth." Ethan's grip tightened on his rifle. "It's over, Thorn," he said, his voice steady, despite the anger building inside him. "You've taken enough. Now you're going down." Without another word, Ethan dropped into a crouch and fired. The sound of gunfire rang through the air, but Thorn had already ducked behind a nearby tree. The standoff had begun. For a few moments, there was silence. Then the crack of gunfire erupted again, this time from Thorn's position. Ethan dove to the ground, narrowly avoiding the bullet that passed just inches from his head. He scrambled for cover, his heart racing. As the battle unfolded, Ethan could feel the weight of his mission growing heavier with each passing second. He wasn't just fighting for himself now, he was fighting for Ava, for Max, and for every person who had been hurt by the black vultures. Noah wasn't far away. Ethan knew he was closing in on the other side of the cabin, ready to cut off Thorn's escape route. They were a team again, united by a cause greater than any of them. The sound of footsteps behind him. Ethan whipped around, rifle raised, but it wasn't Thorn, it was Noah, emerging from the shadows, moving silently as ever, his face hard and determined. "Cover me," Noah said in a low voice, as he made his way toward the back of the cabin, staying low and moving quickly. Ethan nodded, taking up a defensive position, scanning for Thorn. The leader of the Black Vultures wasn't just a threat to Ethan, he was a threat to everything Noah and Ethan had worked for. Moments later, a figure emerged from the trees. Thorn was making a break for it. Ethan's instincts kicked in and he fired again, this time hitting his mark. Thorn stumbled but didn't fall, his hand reaching for his sidearm. But before he could take another step, Noah was there, emerging from the shadows, his rifle raised. One shot, and Thorn went down. He hit the ground with a heavy thud, his rifle falling from his grasp. For a moment everything was still. The sounds of the forest faded away. Ethan and Noah stood there, watching Thorn's lifeless form. The leader of the Black Vultures was no more, but the victory felt hollow. There was no joy in what they had done, only the quiet relief of a mission completed. Ethan turned to Noah, his eyes meeting his friend's. The battle wasn't over, but this was a decisive moment. They had won. Thorn and his followers would not destroy everything they had fought for. "Is it over?" Noah asked, his voice quiet but hopeful. "For now," Ethan replied, his gaze hardening. "But we still have work to do. This isn't just about taking down one leader, it's about stopping them all." As Ethan looked down at Max, the small puppy now awake and wagging its tail in excitement, he realized that their journey wasn't just about survival, it was about building something better. They were fighting for those who had been forgotten, for those who had been left behind, and together they would see it through.